Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're dissecting the absolute nuts and bolts of storytelling, and we're going to uncover the emotional core that makes a narrative truly unforgettable. I'm your host, and we are merging the rigid, highly technical blueprints of screenwriting with the beating heart of character motivation, just to see exactly how great stories are constructed from the ground up. So let's kick things off with the ultimate question. What actually separates a totally forgettable story from an unforgettable one? Why do some narratives just vanish from our brains the second they end, while others literally stick with us for years and change how we see the world? To figure that out, we're going to look right at the high emotional stakes of our first case study, Azam. His whole rags to riches journey was anchored entirely by this incredible framework his mother gave him. She told him money can disappear, but hard work and honesty last forever. This wasn't just a nice little piece of advice, it was his compass. It kept him incredibly grounded through, well, every single hardship he faced, proving that true capital isn't always about cash. Section 1, the screenplay blueprint. Right, so before we can even think about injecting all that rich emotion, we've got to have a rock-solid technical foundation, and this usually starts out as a spec script. Basically, it's a non-commissioned structural blueprint for your narrative. It's totally focused on the story itself, meaning you aren't getting bogged down in stylistic camera movements that you'd typically see in a final shooting script. It's just the pure, unfiltered architecture of your idea. And every professional blueprint out there relies on 6 essential elements of the master scene format to keep things super organized and easy to scan. You've got your scene headings, telling us exactly where and when we are, then action lines, which describe what we physically see and hear, and of course character names, parentheticals for those specific little line deliveries, the actual dialogue, and the transitions that bridge it all together. It's literally the universal language of script writing. In practice, industry standard formatting is all about that classic career 12-point font and proper slug lines. Take this excerpt from the Die Hard script, for example. The scene heading cleanly, instantly establishes we're on the 405 freeway in LA, early evening. And this strict formatting, it's absolutely crucial because one page of a script roughly translates to exactly 1 minute of screen time. We can push that efficiency even further by using subheadings to seamlessly bounce around micro-locations inside a single interior scene. So instead of writing a clunky new master scene heading every single time a character walks through a door, the writer just tosses in capitalized subheadings like bedroom or living room. It keeps the pacing fast, the read easy, and it's just incredibly efficient. Section 2, writing for the eye. Now, there's a pretty stark difference in how we handle visuals depending on the medium. In live action, you can literally just write a busy street and let the location scouts handle the heavy lifting. But animation? That's a whole different ballgame. In an animation script, the writer acts as the very first director. Literally nothing exists until it's written. So you have to explicitly define the visual cues, the physical comedy, the entire environmental design right from scratch. Which brings us straight to that classic show, don't tell ethos. You've got to use visual nouns to physically manifest those abstract ideas on screen. Because let's be honest, just telling the audience a character is sad is, well, it's pretty weak writing. But showing concrete actions, like a character's shoulders totally slumping, or their eyes losing focus, that engages us. It trusts you, the viewer, to actually read the emotion through the performance. So, how do we actually implement this? We use specific character acting poses, deliberate staging, and environmental storytelling to communicate a massive amount of information without saying a single word. Someone leaning forward with wide eyes? Boom, instant anticipation. A super wide shot? It makes the character feel totally isolated in the frame. Even using cool blue colors can subconsciously signal sadness, or throwing a messy desk in the background immediately tells us a character's life is in chaos. That right there is how you write for the eye. Moving on to Section 3, mastering character motivation. Every truly compelling character is driven by something called the ghost. We see this perfectly in our second case study, Daniel. The ghost is basically a traumatic past experience that explains a character's emotional baggage. For Daniel, he was cruelly mocked in the pouring rain as an impoverished 12-year-old. Walking around in torn shoes, carrying those worn-out books, getting laughed at, it left a deep, deep wound. And that humiliation, that became the ghost that fueled his relentless drive to succeed. We can perfectly contrast what was actually driving him here. His extrinsic motivation was pure external survival, escaping poverty, putting food on the table for his sick mother. But his intrinsic motivation, the internal stuff, was all about proving his worth to a world that completely ignored him. Those extrinsic drivers get things moving, sure, but it's the intrinsic motivation that gives a story its real soul. Daniel needed to overcome his deep fear of vulnerability and find a true inner purpose. When we actually track Daniel's timeline, it's wild how his goals map perfectly onto Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Notice how his motivation evolves. At first, at 12 years old, it's just pure survival. But then, as a young adult, it shifts to taking a massive, terrifying risk to start a business. When he hits rock bottom, finding an old photo of his mother reminds him of that deeper intrinsic drive, and that is what finally pushes him years later to become a millionaire, buy his mom a house, and hit that absolute peak of self-actualization. Which leads us to Section 4, structuring the narrative arc. Look, to really test a character's motivation, you have to push them through the classic 3-act sequence and just constantly escalate the obstacles in their path. You spend roughly 25% of your script in the setup, introducing the world and that core driving desire. Then, a massive 50% of the story is the confrontation. This is the meat of it, where they pursue the goal and the stakes go absolutely through the roof. Finally, the last 25% is the resolution, where the character either succeeds, completely fails, or fundamentally transforms. For Azam, his massive Act 2 confrontation was a literal physical storm that totally obliterated his food cart. It's exactly what we call the all is lost moment. Everything he spent years saving for was literally washed away in the rain. But then his mentor pointed out something huge. The physical stuff was gone, sure, but his internal assets, his insane discipline, his real-world experience, his courage, all of that was still completely intact. Armed with that massive internal realization, Azam didn't just rebuild. He scaled an entire empire using an incredibly disciplined 3-step execution formula. And it's so beautifully simple. 1, he listened to his customers relentlessly. 2, he treated his workers with profound kindness, operating on this core belief that real success means rising together. And 3, he never stopped improving the product. It was just the relentless execution of those basics over a really long time. And finally, Section 5. Building a meaningful legacy. Both of our case studies, Azam and Daniel, obviously achieved massive financial wealth, but their true story resolutions, those came from creating value for other people who were still out there struggling in the rain. True resolution has to go way beyond financial metrics. For Azam, it meant using his capital to build schools and create jobs in his village. And for Daniel, the ultimate emotional payoff was seeing a shivering young boy in the rain with torn shoes, and instead of walking past, handing him an umbrella and telling him to never give up on his dreams. So, taking everything we've unpacked in this explainer today, from the rigid blueprint all the way up to the emotional core, I want to leave you with a thought for your own journey. Great stories are never really about the resources a character starts with. They are entirely about resourcefulness. When you look at your own life, at the obstacles standing right in front of you, what will you build with your empty pockets?